Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Today we're diving back into the RPG blogosphere. Over on my newsletter, I frequently highlight different blog posts that I find that I think are particularly interesting. And this one, which is by Magay Baker, is on the topic of what are often referred to as safety tools. Now, Magay is the co-author of Apocalypse World, which is one of the most popular and influential indie games, as well as a whole bunch of other games as well. And what I really liked about this article was the way it reframes the concept of safety tools in a way that makes them more understandable to a wider range of people.
Hello, we're talking about language.
Whenever people bring up safety tools on the internet, it causes all sorts of controversy, from people saying that everyone has to be using them at their table to people saying that no one should be using them. It gets people really fired up almost no matter what happens. And that's probably going to happen in the comments down here too. So if you do leave a comment, please at least watch the whole video and say something thoughtful and respectful. Now, for people who don't know, safety tools are typically systems in role-playing games meant to regulate the flow of information and the concepts and the things that are happening in a game based on if they're making people very uncomfortable or not. So there are systems like the X card, which is probably the most famous one, where you touch an X card in the middle of the table and that means stop and change the subject right away. But there's lots of other ones as well that people have come up with. Now, the side that is very pro safety tools will tend to say, don't you want people to be comfortable at your table? Don't you want a way to easily change the topic if something uncomfortable comes up? So isn't these sorts of systems necessary for any type of role-playing game? Meanwhile, the other side will say, what are you talking about? We have never used a system like this ever in the role-playing games that I've been playing for the last 20 years, and it's never been a problem. Plus, side two will say, why are they called safety tools? That seems to imply that role-playing games are inherently dangerous somehow. It all seems very silly. So let's jump in and look at Magay's article right here and see how she tackles this particular topic. Before we do that though, a quick shout out to today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Slay the Dragon, a brand new old school RPG from Hexy Studios, which is now available for late pledges on Kickstarter. It's a game filled with procedural rules for exploring dungeons, grabbing loot, and trying to escape without being killed. Although if you do die, making a new PC is fast and easy. The game includes a starter box set with an adventure, quick start guide, full rulebook, GM screen, handouts, maps, and more. The perfect starting box for GMs just getting into the OSR. Thanks to Hexy Studios for sponsoring this video, and check out Slay the Dragon using the link in the description. All right, the blog post is entitled Traffic Lights Are Communication Tools at LeMorteGames. I will, of course, put a link to this down in the description so you can read the whole thing. I will try and highlight the main points that I want to talk about, though. So in this section, holding the conversation communication tools, she says, one of the things Vincent and I have been saying for the past dozen, maybe 15 years, is that role-playing with friends is a conversation. It has an ebb and flow, and bursts and lulls, and accidentally bumping into each other or stumbling into a topic that's too heavy or too light or too uncomfortable for the moment at hand. To help navigate this, especially with strangers at conventions, some sort of structure is useful. Enter communication tools. So her first point, I think, is really important, that these types of systems or tools tend to be most useful when you are playing with strangers, particularly at conventions. My experience has been, and I think this is the experience of most people who've played role-playing games, that if you have a group of people that you know really well, they're your friends, you've been playing games with them for years, you already know what they like and what they don't like. You know what kinds of topics they're going to be into and which topics they're going to think are just weird or completely out of place for an RPG. Things aren't quite so simple at conventions. At conventions, you don't know who you're playing with. You're a bunch of strangers. And usually, if they've selected the game system and the adventure and you know what those things are, you typically have a pretty good sense of what you're in for, but not always. Sometimes you have players jumping into a new game with very little knowledge of what they're getting into. And in a case like that, it is good to have some way to easily communicate with each other about when a topic has gone too far or when it is inappropriate or things like that. Starting with Lines and Veils, which was created by Ron Edwards in 2004, and continuing through a lot of variations and iterations, these tools got mislabeled as safety tools. So she talks about how outside of role-playing games, she works in a lot of areas that have a lot of conversations about intense topics. So having these sorts of tools to communicate more clearly were really helpful. From the very start, calling these same sorts of things safety tools when used in a tabletop role-playing game seemed off. A couple years back in the depths of COVID, Elliot and Vincent and I were having a conversation about this, and Elliot said they should be called communication tools because that's what they do. They can't guarantee anyone's safety, but they can help people communicate better. And he's right. I think that's something across the whole RPG space that everyone already agrees on. No one's going to say that a role-playing game is going to be better if you are worse at communicating. I've used tools similar to these when I was teaching. For example, if I'm teaching a math lesson, I might occasionally do checks to see how well people are understanding what I'm saying. And I'll say, hold up a number of fingers, right? 0 fingers means I have no idea what you're talking about, Mr. Milton. And 5 means I totally got it, we can move on. So things like that really help me understand right away where I am at with the people that I'm teaching. I'm not going to be leaving people behind in my teaching, and I'm not going to be going over stuff that they already know. Remember when there was a shift in awareness and therefore in conversation around the idea of a trigger warning? That as it turns out, one cannot possibly know what everyone may find triggering, and it's much more effective and practical to put content warnings on what you made rather than trying to predict what others may find disturbing. This reminds me of something that I've done before when running role-playing games, and I think Kelsey from Shadow Dark uses it too, which is to use movie ratings for the different adventures that you run. So if people sit down at the table, you can say, this is a PG-13 style game, and that immediately gets them in the right mindset of the types of content that would be appropriate for it. The goal is just to set expectations so everyone has a good idea of what they're in for. It's time for a similar shift in how we talk about these tools. They are communication tools. They are only as effective as the people who use them in good faith with a shared understanding of how they work, and they will not, cannot make a situation safe merely by being present. I think that's a really big one. Something that I've heard, at least in the past on social media about this, is that maybe something goes wrong in a game and people are very upset, or someone was acting like a jerk, and someone says, if only you had had the X card on the table, this wouldn't have happened. And in my view, that's usually not the case. If someone is being a jerk, they're probably going to be a jerk whether or not there are safety tools in place. Please call things like lines and veils and the consent flower and temp check and traffic light communication tools, and pick one that fits your table. Anecdotally, I have an actual trauma response to the X card, as to me, it is a reminder of being barred from acknowledging or talking about real and serious problems. I understand that this was not the designer's intent. Trauma responses are not always logical. Her overall point here is that you need to use what is appropriate for your table. You talk to the players and figure out what makes sense for you. And for a lot of groups, that's just going to be normal, open communication. One of the problems that I've seen in the past, I don't know if it's still prevalent today, but I used to see people saying online that you would have to use particular safety tools, communication tools at your table. Like, for example, you have to use the X card. You are not running a good game if you do not have an X card on the table. And that just doesn't make any sense. A lot of groups are going to find that very artificial and very awkward and actually make things harder to communicate, whereas just talking back and forth normally is how they're going to work better. Anecdotally speaking, I've been in a lot of different con games, and I don't think I've ever seen the X card actually being used. In the one example I can think of where someone did find out that the game they were playing was really not right for them, they didn't hit the X card. Instead, what they just said was, I don't think I'm in the right headspace for this. The content of this game isn't really what I was expecting, so I think I'm just going to bow out. They didn't try to change the content of the game or force everyone to play a particular way. They just recognized that they weren't compatible with what this game was doing. And everyone, of course, was perfectly fine with that, which is like, oh, sorry, man, I guess this wasn't right for you. No problem. Have a great day. Basically, my experience has been is that generally people feel more comfortable just talking openly about these sorts of things rather than having a artificial system in place for controlling it. But of course, that's going to vary per table and per player. Speaking for myself, if I was running a game, maybe at a convention with people I didn't know, and the topic was something very fraught, maybe it was a very intense horror game, I would both, at the beginning of the game, set expectations for the kind of game that it is, and I would likely check in periodically just to see if everyone was okay, right? Is everyone okay? Is this getting too crazy? Or is everyone cool with the level of intensity that this is at? Whereas if I was playing that sort of game with my friends, I likely wouldn't have to do that because they would just tell me. Overall, I thought this post was really insightful because it clarifies the language. By referring to these things as communication tools rather than as safety tools, it helps people see one of the main goals for them and helps get people on board with what their purpose is. Almost everyone can agree that being able to communicate clearly is a good thing. And depending on your situation, having this tool or this tool could be the better solution. Well, those are my thoughts on the topic. You can leave your own down in the comments below, as long as they are, of course, thoughtful and considerate. Rants or personal attacks of any kind will just be removed. I know everyone gets very fired up about this issue, but try and keep it civilized. Remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one, and you can subscribe to my free newsletter if you want to get more interesting blog posts sent directly to your email. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.